I'm a professor in environmental studies here at U of M and the foolish organizer of the Symposium. I often say that the reason the symposia are 5 years apart is the same reason my mother's children were spaced 5 years apart. It takes that long to forget how much trouble the last one was and be ready to do another one. So we had some great talks last night, the State of the River report and a look at the transformation of Silverbow Creek and the Milltown area. And the roundtable yesterday put on by the Clark Fork Basin Task Force covered a number of the important plans, drought plans and aquatic nuisance species plans and water management plans that have been developed in the basin in recent years. So I would like to go ahead and try to get us as close to being on time as possible by turning this over to our moderator. This panel is called Bringing Back the Upper River, a very long play with many actors taking part in it. And the moderator is Daryl Barton of the Clark Fork River Technical Assistance Committee. I believe you live in Deer Lodge, is that correct? And he will introduce the other members. There is one of these little pointer things up here should anybody need to do any pointing. We're going to try to keep finger pointing to a minimum if we can. So turn it over to Daryl.
Thank you, Vicki. Yeah, my name is Daryl Barton. I'm with the Clark Fork River Technical Assistance Committee, one of those long, drawn-out names for a group that we have a lot of those on the Upper Clark Fork, actually. We're a TAG group. We're a technical assistance group, and our function really is to get as much public involvement in the Superfund sites as possible. Public meetings. We have a great website with all sorts of information. We work with the government agencies, the responsible party, which in this case was Atlantic Richfield, ARCO. But mostly, we really try to get as much community involvement in the process as possible to make it public. This is our panel, and I'll just introduce everybody. This is Joel Chavez with DEQ, and Carol Fox. Let's see here. Carol Fox with NRD, the Natural Resource Damage Program. Maybe I'll stand over here. And we've got Mark Kelley with DEQ. He's in charge of restoration. Joel is remediation. And let's see, Pat Suffle with the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And then John Hollenbeck. We're very happy to have John here. He's a local landowner in the Gold Creek area on the river, and he's also head of the Watershed Restoration Coalition. He can tell you a little bit more about that. I'm going to keep my talk pretty brief here. I tried to go through and get as many good pictures as I could. I've got some awesome pictures over the years. And it started with a chronology, and Vicki had people send things. This chronology just grew and grew and grew and grew about river things. And I just picked out some of the major highlights from the upper river stuff, and it really starts with 1908. There was a huge flood in 1908 that washed mining contamination down the river, and you see it all along the banks of the Clark Fork River from Warm Springs to Deer Lodge, and then it's less and less as you go, and it actually built up behind Milltown Dam, and that's why we had to remove the dam and remove those sediments, was right from this 1908 flood. So it washed all this contamination down the river. Here's an example of a contaminated slickens area on the Clark Fork River. There's Mount Powell in the background there, and you can kind of see a bluish tint to it. That bluish tint is indicative of copper, oxygen and copper coming together, and that shows the copper, but that's also just showing that there's other mining contaminants. There's a lot of them, and nothing grows there. Arsenic is a very effective herbicide, and so you see these areas and they're just devoid of vegetation. So the arsenic affects the vegetation, but then the copper that's in that affects the fish, and we had major fish kills that were a result of the copper. Here's another slickens area. It's kind of a pretty blue color there. I've got a bunch of these, and then here's an overhead, an aerial view of the Clark Fork River. This is just upstream of Deer Lodge, and you can see all those dead areas there, and those are all just slickens area there. From mining contamination that's washed up there. It's an awesome photo there. Okay, and then, so from 1908 is when the contamination occurred, and then because of that, and contamination that kept coming from the Butte area and going down Silverbow Creek and then getting to the Clark Fork River, they constructed the Warm Springs Ponds, and it's basically just a large settling area. at the very top of this, there's a lime introduction area, and then that binds with the contaminants, and then they end up settling before it goes into the Clark Fork River. So at the very bottom of this, you can see where the outfall is, and that's basically the beginnings of the Clark Fork River. So we're protecting the Clark Fork River from mining contaminants now that still come down from Silver Bow Creek and from Butte in major high water events by using the Warm Springs ponds. And they were built in about the 1910s, and they made improvements through the years. In the 1950s, they did a lot of improvements, and then as we'll see in the 1990s, they did some amazing improvements on these ponds. It's become quite an awesome wildlife habitat, and if you might be able to see there's a bald eagle up in the tree there, and an eagle's nest. There's osprey, all sorts of birds. It's really an amazing area that way. It's just become outstanding. Mount Powell in the background there. There it is again. There's a historic bridge that you might be able to see down there. I think that was the old Yellowstone Trail, and and they kept that even though the ponds ended up flooding that entire area. They kept that, and it's kind of a historical landmark through there. So, nothing really huge happened from the 50s all the way down until about the 80s, and that's where it really started getting going. Superfund became law. In 1980, it was passed by Congress, and then right at the same time, mining in Butte and Anaconda ceased, and the Anaconda smelter closed, so that was a big year. In 1982, the Butte mine workings shut down, and mine shafts and the Berkeley pit began to fill with water, and that continues today. And then in 1989, I remember this, there was major fish kills on the Clark Fork River, and that was attributed to this area here, the Mill Willow Bypass, which hadn't had the improvements that we see now. That washed into the water, and then the copper caused major fish kills. I had heard some people say that half the fish in that area were killed by that event. But I thought this picture was a good one. If you probably can't see it very well, but the stack is way up there. The Anaconda smelter stack is way up in the top there. You can just barely see it. And then you've got what used to be called the Opportunity Ponds here, but now it's the waste repository for Atlantic Richfield. And then you cross Interstate 90, and you've got the Mill Willow Bypass there, and then the beginnings of the Warm Springs Pond. So you've got a lot going on there with Superfund in that picture. There's another shot of the Mill Willow Bypass. This was created, it's Mill Creek and Willow Creek put together, and then it comes down this man-made channel right next to the Warm Springs Ponds. There's Interstate 90 again. And then that dumps into the outfall from the Warm Springs Ponds and creates what we now know as the beginnings of the Clark Fork River. Okay, in 1992, EPA designated the Clark Fork River from the outlet of Warm Springs Ponds that I'm talking about to the Milltown Reservoir as an operable unit. It became a Superfund operable unit. And then from then, the government agencies and ARCO, they studied the situation, they debated, they negotiated, and they came up with a record of decision in 2004, consent decree on different lawsuits that the state had against ARCO in 1999, and then a big one in 2008. That was the Clark Fork River consent decree was signed. And there's huge dollar amounts right there to go for cleanup. So that's the end of my discussion. We blasted through about 100 years of the river right there. And so I'd like to turn it over to Joel Chavez. He's head of the remediation unit for the Clark Fork River, Montana DEQ.
Thanks, Daryl.
You bet.
Oh, here we go. Good morning. Thanks, Daryl. I'm Joel Chavez with DEQ, and I'm just here to talk about a couple things. I got my marching orders here. Your mission and charge in restoring the river. What we do, the state, through the settlement, both DEQ and the National Resource Damage Program are going to conduct a joint remedy and restoration project on the river. And right now, we're starting with right now today, we're starting with about $127 million invested by the State Board of Investments, so hopefully that will increase. But we're supposed to clean this mess up, and it's quite a mess, and it's quite a challenge to do it. We're fully capable of doing it, and that's what we're going to do when we can finally get started. We're trying to work some stuff out with EPA. They're the oversight agency on this one. Even though it's a state lead, they have a role in it, and they're our partners, so we've got to work some things out with them. And the other thing here says your long-term vision of the river, and it's real simple. We're going to clean that mess up and put it back together. as it should be. The real challenge is not to do this work. There's going to be some pitfalls and some things there. The challenge is what the people in the valley do with the river when we're done. Because we're going to make it pretty nice. And you can see, the way Montana's grown that I've seen in the last 20 years, the real challenge is to keep it into a productive watershed and not subdivide it into tennis courts and condominiums. And, that's really the long-term vision that I see. We will do our work, and it will turn out fine, but that's the real challenge to people in the future is what they do with their river when we're gone, because most all that land is private property. They're in big ranches, tough times for everybody, but, the real thing that I've seen is that, somebody comes in and just says, how much for the ranch and opens a checkbook. Some guys get tired of feeding the cows and they just sell it out. So that's really the challenge in the end is not, my work or the state's work and EPA's work. It's what folks do with that river when we're done. And that's really the future. So, just a little, voice in the wilderness there. That's what I see, mainly as the future. A few key accomplishments. Well, we're getting things worked out with the EPA. And that's an accomplishment. We've got some things planned this summer. We're going to do some work in Deer Lodge. There's a trestle there that's pretty messed up. There's a few yards that have some arsenic values that need to go. There's some properties along the east side of the river that never got worked on under some things with ARCO. And we want to get going on that. And then we want to get a design basically for the first 3.5 river miles. And the river pretty meandering down there, so 3.5 miles is about a mile actually. But when you walk up and down the banks, it gets a little longer than that. So that's what we're going to do this year. And after that, we pretty much got to go full tilt to the effect that, I'd like to see, or my vision of the budget, and I put it together, is, 2, 3, or 4 major construction projects a year for the next 10 years. So it's really going to be a busy place down there. But it's a new and different place than we worked on before, and it's got some technical challenges. The groundwater is very close to the surface. These are productive ranches. They're private property. We have to do our job, but we got to respect the private property rights of people that are trying to make a living down there. So that's a little different. As I said last night, Silverbow Creek, you just walk down there with landowners and say, well, it's green and it's blue. What do you think? And they just think it's a wonderful idea. But, this is productive land down there, so people have, economic invested interest in their own property. So that's going to be a little different. I'm sure we can get through it. The main thing is to get started, get going. The first place we're going to start is land owned by ARCO and the state of Montana. So we think that we can, if we do that right, we'll start getting people on board with what we're doing. So it's kind of things in reverse. The first one you got to do pretty much has to be the best because up on the river, it's like drums on the Mohawk. People know what you're doing. And so you have to set a real good example. And, the main thing in Montana, tell people what you're going to do and then do what you say you're going to do is really how it works. As far as coordination, we're in a CERCLA site, and it's pretty much our territory, ours and the EPA's. But we do have to coordinate with, of course, landowners, CFRTAC, and their role is really to let the community know what's going on all the time. So we got to get our message across in, the minutia of technical detail. So Daryl and company can help put it in English, because a lot of what we talk is, acronyms. You have to take a 4-year course in acronyms when you do this kind of work, but we try to get it out there. Also, we're going to be working eventually with TMDL folks on the tributaries and the watershed groups that are all involved in the tributaries, so everything around us. So the coordination, we could do our thing, but we have to let people know exactly what we're doing and why we're doing it and when we're doing it so they can coordinate their efforts in the basin. That's really the main coordination part that we have. But generally it's between the agencies and the public, but we have to let other folks know that are working in the basin what we're doing so they can do their planning so things mesh together and aren't mislatched, as the old drillers would say. And that's when it doesn't work, when you're doing one thing and then somebody else comes in and says, well, we're going to do another thing, and they don't overlap. So that's the real communication part of what we do. I could point at some other folks in the audience, but I'm not going to do that. Anyway, that's the long and short of it. That is what we're going to do. That's what we're doing, and those are the players. And we've got a lot of work to do. And it's Montana's a tough place to work. You generally have to do a year's worth of work in 6 months, and especially up there. So those are the challenges that I'm seeing, and they're big. And I guess the term is we're not running out of opportunities to excel. So saying that, I said it all.
Thank you, Joel. Next, we'd have Carol Fox from the Natural Resource Damage Program with the state.
Advance the slides.
Okay. With me today, too, Tom Mostad. I have 2 handouts with my presentation. One is a map of where we're doing work in the basin, and the second is a website abstract to all the information available on our website. Joel reviewed what Vicki asked us to cover. She also indicated that it was kind of a mission impossible to do in 8 to 10 minutes, so we'll just give you the tip of the iceberg and know that there's a lot of information resources available out there. I'd also like to recognize Greg Mullen wherever he is hiding. And Greg, if you'd raise your hand, thank you. Also with the Natural Resource Damage Program today. So where we started was the state's lawsuit in 1983 filed against ARCO for hazardous substance releases that caused injuries to the groundwater, surface water, fisheries, and wildlife in the basin. And this slide just shows the areas that were the major focus of that lawsuit, and they're the major focus of where we do work in the basin. And I just have to give a big thank you. I know there are folks out here that had the foresight to get the state to file this lawsuit in 1983. ARCO almost tried to stop it from being filed, as you can imagine. And then the tremendous support that comes from the community's basin and all the folks involved in what was a pretty much Herculean effort in this lawsuit. ARCO did a good job trying to kill it over a 25-year period. So my thank you to all the friends of the lawsuit. And for accomplishments then of the lawsuit, this is a summary table. We have had three settlements now from our 1983 lawsuit, and the first one being the largest one. I'm on the second column here. I'm not gonna, let's see, is this the point? Yeah. There we go. Second column here is the money actually acquired in natural resource damages that can be used for restoration in the basin. And then this one over here, this column, where is it? I don't know. Oh, there we go. Is associated with these settlements has been money dedicated to the remediation. You can get those figures anywhere. I'm not going to review them. But an important point is that the threat of a natural resource damage lawsuit can often result in a more effective long-term cleanup if it's out there than would have otherwise occurred. And that's something that we're learning nationwide about the value of natural resource damage lawsuits. The 3 that we're involved with in the basin are highlighted in the lighter color, and we do have one consent decree being negotiated for the Anaconda area I'll touch on a little bit later, plus a settlement for the Upper Blackfoot Mine Complex, the Mike Horse Mine, and a settlement for East Helena. And I thank you, Daryl, for reviewing some of those settlements as well. Okay, our mission is in the law. And it is to restore, replace, or acquire the equivalent of injured natural resources and lost services. And there are 2 parts of this equation in the law. Restoration means we're actually improving those resources and services that were covered under the lawsuit in those injured areas. And replacement is we're improving like resources and services outside those injured areas. And by policy, our dollars can only be spent in the Upper Claw Fork River Basin. There are some limited exceptions that let you in the door if you're going to help the resources in the basin. And our priority is the restoration. There's another half to our mission statement. It is to restore, replace, and acquire in a timely, cost-effective, and prioritized manner. And that is the future for us. I'll talk a little next here. But with our first settlement in 1999, $130 million has been generating interest that we've been funding an annual grants program with. And the map here is being handed out. You're not going to be able to see all those sites of the grants that have been funded through this program over 11 years. A total of 104 restoration grants approved by the governor, $80 million that have been approved. Not all of it spent yet, but a significant effort to improve resources in the basin. And I'd like to recognize that we have a major voice. The governor makes the final decisions about how our dollars are spent, but we have a major voice in an advisory council that consists of representatives from the counties in the basin, our partner agencies, sister agencies, DEQ, FWP, and DNRC, as well as the tribes and the U.S. Department of Interior. There are several of you in the audience, and I can't see you all, so would you just please raise your hand, all the representatives from our advisory council? We have some citizen representatives. Yay, okay, all right. I know this is okay. So with that, the funding, and just the next slide just shows the type of funding that the projects have been funded for. 46% will be for water system improvements that are ongoing and planned in Butte and Anaconda. These communities have severe groundwater contamination. It cannot, at this point, from a technology standpoint, be remediated and restored. So what we're paying for is the delivery of clean water from other places. So that's been 46%. A major priority for us is that integration of remediation and restoration. That's the other 27%, primarily through the Silverbow Creek Greenway Grant, work that the NRDP, the Greenway Service District, and DEQ are doing together to add and do restoration along with remediation on Silverbow Creek. It's a large amount of dollars there. You'll see acquisitions at 17% of the approved projects. This is acquiring quality fish and wildlife habitat and recreational lands in the basin, and tributary improvements, education and monitoring and research projects. So that's $80 million there. Here's another $80 million that is dedicated to work in our specific areas. It's on the second part of that map that handed out. And this is where, in our first lawsuit, we had $130 million dedicated for restoration in the basin in our Part 99 settlement. But with the 2008 settlement, what we had was dollars dedicated to specific priority injured areas. Moving upstream down. Butte Area 1 restoration is a groundwater claim, and we have just now a local council that will be a very big voice in deciding how those dollars dedicated to that site are spent. It's complicated. There's a lot to do. One is to consider mine tailings removal, like at the Parrot tailings. There you have 1 million part per billion copper in the groundwater, and so can there be additional tailings to remove? The groundwater is actually worse than the Berkeley pit there. So other choices are to augment the caps on mine waste sites or to do water replacement projects. That's Butte Area 1. Work on Silverbow Creek, already touched. That's covered through the grants program, the Greenway Service District. Then we have Anaconda area dedicated sites. The upland areas will primarily be doing revegetation work in those areas around Anaconda. The Dutchman project is consent decree we're negotiating now that involves the acquisition of water and land rights. Sorry, I'll stay in the same place here. The acquisition of water and land rights in that area, the water rights being huge, could be 40 CFS of Warm Springs Creek, as well as 6 miles of restoration of these sections of Warm Springs Creek shown there, and 1 mile of restoration and remediation on Willow Creek that's also shown on the map. Then we have the Clark Fork River. Thank you, Daryl and Joel, for covering that for me. I don't need to say anything more. Integrating remediation and restoration. And we also have Milltown Restoration. Thank you, Diana, for giving that splendid show last night, showing all the work done there to achieve a naturally functioning channel and floodplain system. So we have these priority areas and we have the grants. And now back to that mission statement, that other part of the mission statement. And you tell me how I'm doing on time. So, okay. That part about restoring, replacing, and acquiring in a timely, cost-effective, and prioritized manner. You have one individual project, and it can be good from a lot of standpoints, looking at that individual project. But when you're looking at it from the entire basin, is it the best bang for the buck? Could you have done more for the same amount of money somewhere else in the basin? Well, we've been asking that question, and a whole lot of people have been asking us to answer that question. And behind the scenes has been an effort, primarily through NRDP and FWP scientists, to prioritize aquatic and terrestrial restoration in the basin, finding where those best opportunities exist. Pat will talk more about the fisheries. Separate from that, the counties have also been funded to identify their priorities for their water system improvements. And this major effort behind the scenes on the fisheries and aquatic assessment and prioritization work is about ready to come to the forefront with draft documents expected here in 2010. Let me give this disclaimer before you've ever heard anything about it, that it is a work in progress. We learned from Vicki last night that I think it was like 85% of the streams had not been assessed. So we're dealing with a lot of data gaps. Even when you're dealing with a record of decision, we find that when we want to go dig, we find that we need to know more about the extent of tailings that were there. So we will be presenting information and proposed prioritization based on what we know, but understand that it's going to evolve, and as our knowledge increases, those priorities will change. And that is the beauty of learning from knowledge and here and experiences of what works and what doesn't. So last topic, how we coordinate in the big picture, the bigger picture of the basin. For us, it is the whole basin. And Vicki, I think you said it was a lot of players in a play. And for me, it is an intricate spider's web. And we're all connected. And we have this common goal of improving the resources to the basin. But within a common goal, all the entities doing this work have different focuses. There's an entity, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, native trout. A major bull trout restoration, major priority. For us, we would like to see trout in Silver Bow Creek. When we saw one on the slide last night, we'd like to see more of those. And restoration of injured areas is our priority. So I don't think all the people in the world were doing work in the basin should sort of like inflict our special missions or priorities on others, but recognize them, understand them, and work together and maximize leveraging. I'm just going to give you an example of just a wonderful project that's making that happen. It's the West Side Ditch. We have flow will be huge. I'm sure you heard about yesterday. You'll hear it from Vicki. But the West Side Ditch is a ailing irrigation system from Racetrack Creek to Deer Lodge. And by improving that irrigation system, we can improve flows to the river. And flow in the river is huge. And you have the Upper Clark Fork Steering Committee that started a grant to us. The irrigators are part of it. The Montana Water Trust has taken over and guiding this project. It needs a lot of data collection. DNRC has helped use their staff to fill in the data gaps. And the Clark Fork Coalition then has united with Montana Water Trust. So what we have is this world of funding opening up on a project that could offer great improvements to the fishery through the NRCS, through the Columbia Basin Fisheries Program, through the NRDT and others. So that's how I think that coordination, some people would have one entity orchestrating the web, and I say don't do it. I think we coordinate well. John, the landowners, they're critical, and John calls me when he sees something he thinks is going wrong, and also tells us when we think something's going right. And I think that's the way it should be. We should share information, share learning experiences, and develop partnerships like the West Side Ditch for project needs. Lastly, I was here 5 years ago, it seems like 10, and everybody kept on asking me, when is the lawsuit going to be done? Well, hey, we've a major accomplishment in the last 5 years, and look what's happened on Silver Bow Creek in the last 10, and Milltown in the last 5, and understand that the major work in this basin is yet to come, so we have a lot to look forward to, and a whole lot of folks working for the right restoration in the basin. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. I really appreciate your comparison of the people working on the river to a spider web. I think sometimes I feel like a spider, but a lot of times I feel like a fly trapped in the web, actually. I'm sure I share that with a lot of other people. Our next speaker is Mark Kelley. He's with the Montana Department of Environmental Quality, and he's more the restoration end of it.
Thank you, Daryl. I'm going to talk a little bit wider at more of a watershed scale. And again, not to differentiate, but restoration goes outside some of the natural resource damage types of things. We're trying to cast essentially a ridgeline to ridgeline look at water quality in general. And that process is driven by TMDLs. Or at least that's a starting point. So that's kind of what I'll use as the starting point. TMDLs, or total maximum daily loads, are the kind of a science-based approach to look at watersheds on a bigger scale. And they're basically about meeting state water quality standards. So that's kind of the driver on it. It involves interpreting water quality standards so that they're locally applicable. A lot of water quality standards are either involves narratives or a variety of scales that are fairly technically complex. So it's essentially trying to translate those types of water quality standards into something that's a little more usable. So there's essentially, as you can see on the bottom half of this slide, 7 steps that are involved in TMDLs that are done for all of the watersheds. But it's water quality standards, some impairments, as was pointed out last night. It only goes after those waters that have impairments that have been identified. And DEQ is very straightforward. We acknowledge we don't have a lot of information. So there's a lot of particularly smaller tributaries that are not part of the TMDL process that need to be, and I'll get to that in a minute. Source assessment, where stuff is coming from, loads, margins of safety, monitoring. We acknowledge that there's not enough information. And then public involvement and participation, particularly conservation districts and watershed groups. And this, the watershed restoration outside of the heavily impacted areas tends to be a locally driven process. And that's kind of, I think, my take-home message is that in order to be effective for outside the areas that need major restoration, it needs to be a locally driven process. Okay, what are TMDLs? Well, they cannot divest or diminish existing water rights. They are kind of broken down into 2 parts for non-point sources, stuff that doesn't come out of a pipe or doesn't involve a permit, that TMDLs involve restoration that is primarily voluntary, which is, again, why local partners are so crucial. For point sources, or for those that are involved in remediation, then the TMDL takes the approach that you use the necessary measures that are identified in permits and programs. Okay, here's an activity map. How far along is this process? As you can see, there's a fair number that are started, and I'll have a more detailed list, but it's an ongoing process. There, and Vicki showed this slide, I believe, last night as well. So where are we in the Clark Fork? This is actually the TMDLs that have been completed, what they're for. I should probably break it down a little bit. TMDLs are not can be for specific categories of pollutants. Typically, they're sediment, nutrients, metals, and those types of things. Temperature is another one. We're doing a lot more temperature TMDLs, where the water temperatures are exceeding existing standards. Here's the ones that are nearing completion, and these again are probably the more complex ones involving the Bitterroot main stem, the Little Blackfoot, and Flint Creek. And these are pretty far along, and there are some of the folks in the room here are working on those TMDLs, as well as there's quite a few local watershed groups that are involved in these. And then finally, some of the larger, more complex ones include the lower Clark Fork tributaries, the middle Clark Fork, Rock Creek, and of course the Clark Fork River main stem in Silver Bow Creek. And that will build on all of the work that's going on in those areas. What do TMDLs do? They basically identify targets, or what are equivalents of water quality standards for sediment. And these can be simple things like channel dimensions or sediments in the stream or streamside vegetation. So it's pretty straightforward. Sediment, something we have a pretty good handle on. Nutrients is a little more complex. Montana's nutrient standards are a little more complex to interpret and involve a variety of translations. But here are some of the kinds of targets that come out of TMDLs: total phosphorus, nitrogen, chlorophyll A, those types of things. Temperature is a little more straightforward. Water's too warm. And this can be measured by temperature logging, streamside shade, narrowing channels, working on water discharge, those types of things. And then metals is also fairly straightforward. You have too much metal in the water column. Okay, so you have a TMDL that says what the targets are. Again, it's a process. It's not a TMDL in and of itself is not an answer. It's simply saying, here's kind of a framework, here's kind of the goals, here's the targets we're working towards, here's where we are, how do we get from where we are to where we want to be? And that's what watershed restoration plans are all about, and this is where the voluntary portion of TMDLs is focused. And it identifies the tools for achieving the priority targets, and these priority targets are set by the local watershed groups and by the cooperating agencies in the area. And again, I'd like to emphasize that for most non-point sources of water impairments, the focus from the larger watershed scale is to look at TMDLs as locally driven with local partners that then select their priority actions. So, for example, what could they do? For agriculture, it might be best management practices and identify what streams. We had an excellent example on the west side ditch in the upper Clark Fork. Those types of setting priorities. Same thing for mine drainage, or in some cases for water treatment plants. Those tend to be more point sources, but there can be TMDL assistance involved in looking at what can be done to upgrade those plants. And who does that? Again, it's local conservation districts, watershed groups to implement their plans, and also to recruit and work with partners. And I think that's what the situation is, particularly in the upper Clark Fork, is who are those partners? How do you make this web a little bit more effective, and make sure that local folks that are the private landowners are part of the process. Indeed, our view is are driving the process for those areas that are outside major damage areas. Okay, after the TMDL, you try to involve coordination. It's voluntary. The TMDL can be used to leverage grant funds. We've talked a little bit about grant funding. It also is helpful in terms of setting some of the priorities. Again, the implementation for point source reductions involves permits and other more necessary kinds of actions. The other thing that TMDLs do is identify that there should be progress. And so by having targets, you can see, are we making progress towards those targets? And as part of state law, DEQ is charged with assessing on a reasonable basis. We're supposed to be doing 5-year reviews. Like many other projects, it doesn't happen exactly on schedule. But assessing is progress being made in a reasonable period of time. And that's pretty much the summary of TMDLs and watershed restoration plans for the Upper Clark Fork. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the individual things.
Thank you, Mark. And I appreciate everybody holding your questions to the end. We might, if we get through the next two quickly, we might have some time for questions, actually. And I've told Pat no longer than 11. I mean, at first I said 6 to 8. He said I was told 11, so we'll see how he does with that.
And this clicker works?
It does, yeah. Half of us have been using it.
Okay, I'll try it.
I didn't.
So last night, Vicki referred to Joel and Diana as fairy godfather and godmother, and I saw a long play with many actors. So, Vicki, I wonder what my role is, and I'd like to know by the end. I'm a little nervous about it, but I'm also excited. So I think I'd really like to know. And then. Yeah, don't look at the map yet. Through some twist of logic, I want to talk about some of the things that I'm not going to talk about. But I heard some of the presentations last night, and what was the Upper Clark Fork? Well, if you included the Blackfoot, then that involves some more things that we're doing. It's just worth referencing some of the things we were doing elsewhere and in the Upper Clark Fork. For example, I'm not going to be talking about Milltown, but I am. And in the past, before removal, we were making the case and giving information about the benefits of dam removal to fisheries. Then during the project, we moved into a role of informing EPA and construction managers about effects and how to limit those effects. And now we're hopefully looking to work with EPA on the response of the fishery to removal. And as the habitats change in the area and as fish begin moving throughout the area, I think that'd be a really interesting thing to find out. Fish have this unique role, I'd say, in a lot of this work is they often provide the connection of parts per billion to people. And we hope we can do that work in the future. If we go into the Blackfoot, 40,000 plus acres of land acquisition and conservation. I can't list the number of cooperators. I wish I could. Some of them are here. My course mine. If you go into the Upper Clark Fork, some of the things I'm not talking about again. Work on Willow and Warm Springs Creek, restoration and remediation, fishing access site development. We heard about Dutchman land and water acquisition, and finally some of the facilities at Warm Springs Ponds, some of the improvements. Although we don't know the ultimate disposition of those ponds, at least in the short term, we're going to provide a better recreational facility there. And then one other thing I've been doing lately is praying for snow. I often do this alone, but if anyone feels like a group effort would help, I'm open to suggestions. Okay, so now the map, and don't concentrate on the dots. I kind of put them out there where I thought they'd apply, but generally the message is we've worked in scattered areas in the Clark Fork. Not a really united effort or towards a goal end from a watershed standpoint, but really the NRD program provided us an opportunity to look at that in a different way. So here's where we're working in the Upper Clark Fork now. And really, it's all encompassing. And I can't say enough about the work that's happening. We have a couple of posters being presented here by a couple of students from another university. I can't remember the name, but it's. I invite you to go look at the posters and talk to the students, Mariah Mayfield and Joe Naughton. Also, we have other Fish, Wildlife, and Parks folks, Trevor Selch, Brad Learman, and Jason Lindstrom also working in the basin. So we're putting a lot of effort, and again, there's a lot of cooperators, but I'd go over my time if I started listing all of them. So the idea of that whole big dot on the Upper Clark Fork and working towards an end of meeting some fishery goals was basically to deal with this dichotomy, I guess, where in the past those random dots were kind of, here's a restoration opportunity, and in the end, well, let's describe how those might benefit fish. But if you really want to start achieving specific goals, you put the fish benefit first, and then you tell people where to look for the opportunity. So that's the switch that we're making in collecting this information that, frankly, we've been without for about 20 years, and we're trying to make up for in about 3. So in working with NRD, and this is, I'm describing the assessments here, from starting in about 2007, we looked at, I have listed 120 tributaries to the Upper Clark Fork. That's above Milltown. That's a low number. I think it's actually a little bit higher than that, and that's a lot of water. So in working with the folks that I mentioned, it's an honor to even say that I'm associated with the hard work and the quality work that they've done. But 120 tributaries have been sampled for habitat and fisheries. The main stem of Silverbow Creek has been routinely sampled through monitoring, but also recently the Clark Fork was sampled from Warm Springs Ponds to Milltown Dam for the first time since 1987. There's part of Mariah's work, one of the grad students, is 100 plus radio tagged trout in the Clark Fork and following their migrations and habitat use. And then Joe's working on tagged fish in Silverbow Creek. And basically we're looking at what resources these fish use and some of the environmental factors that affect the habitat they use. So our product in prioritization is a prioritization of areas. We do document what we believe is impacting the fisheries, but we didn't do complete assessments of watersheds. That's hard to do in a couple years over the expanse that was being covered. So we're directing folks to areas, and again, where we've noticed, we'll mention what we think some of the impacts are, but it may not be the limiting factor all the time. So we're really concentrating on three goals, and so it's restore the main stem trout fishery. I mean, that's really the was one of the main reasons for the lawsuit. So it's really a major, probably the major goal that we're trying to achieve. Enhance angling in the tributaries. That's kind of a mitigation for lost angling in the main stem. So it's kind of a secondary goal, but still valuable and can also contribute to the first goal. And then maintain and enhance native fishes in the drainage is just an important thing to keep our heritage and legacy and some of those genetic components in the drainage. So when I thought of who we're working with, such a long list, but many partners, and I just gave some categories. I think everyone could say just about the same thing. And then for a vision, I put the fishery goals, and that's my role in this, but I understand that the vision's larger than just the fish part, and when you consider the many partners and to be inclusive of everyone and being part of a conservation community and being more likely to get success, I think you have to look at the vision as being a larger one. So I started down the fish side, and I said, you know what, it's hard for me to admit, but it is more than just fish. And so I just wrote out a vision, a draft one of my own, and I said, still fish are an integral part of this vision and a surrogate for some of the things that we think are important in the Upper Clark Fork. So I think Fish, Wildlife, and Parks will play a major role, and hopefully with many people in this room. And then a final mention is that in Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and probably throughout this group and many other places, there were people that spent a career in the 80s and the 90s, et cetera, trying to make this stuff happen. And then people like me come in and get an opportunity to do the fun stuff. So thanks to the folks that took part in that.
Thank you, Pat. Pat Suffle with Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And our final speaker is a little bit different than the rest of us. He actually owns land on the Clark Fork River. And I think that's a very valuable thing to have, and we're very honored to have Mr. John Hollenbeck here.
Thanks, Daryl. I guess it's good to be a little different. But, you know, just a little quick history on what I'm a rancher from Gold Creek, and I've been involved with things, been on the Conservation District for about 40 years, and so I've had a great interest in what's happening. And back in the 90s, when this was all coming down, I had the opportunity to sit at some meetings, and one time I was in Deer Lodge for 2 days listening to meetings, and I come out of the meetings kind of shaking my head that all the lawsuit and everything that's coming down, and in 2 days, the landowners was not mentioned. And I thought, wow, there's a little something missing here. So I got on the telephone and I called some people over at DNRC and got some help from them and got some people together, and we decided to organize and just not to be controversial, but to say, yeah, the landowners are a big part of what's happening here, and what can we do to help, and what can we do as landowners to understand where other people are coming from, and also what the other side, that they can understand where we're coming from. And so we see a great value in that, and so we proceeded and we took some pretty small steps for a while. It's kind of a hard thing to do to get organized. We got a few dollars and we hired a coordinator, and finally it took 2 meetings to decide on the name. So that's how fast we moved. But from there we proceeded, and I think we've kind of done some pretty neat things, and we've got a lot more to do. And one of the things I think that we're the proudest of that's happened so far is to, as landowners, to learn to work with people that may not think the same as we do. We have some differences. One example we had when we had one of our first meetings, I had some people from the Clark Fork Coalition come up, and they were at our meeting, and they kind of sat in the back of the room in those days, and our first meeting, and so decided, well, gosh, I had some people come to me, I was chairman, and I had some people, do we want those people, you know, sticking their nose into our business? Well, you know, that just tells how far we had to come as landowners. So what I did at that time, I invited them to my house for, fed them lunch and said, here, this is what I do, and what do you do? And we laughed and told a few stories, and we got to know each other and said, hey, we got a lot to build on here. We don't need to be thinking that way. Well, to make a long story short, the Clark Fork Coalition is now a member of our WRC group, and they're a very important part of our group. So we use that as a learning process, and I think that's what's going to make this river a better place, this whole drainage a better place, is working together. And I think I was really encouraged by what Joel said today, is that, you know, we're not experts on what's happening on the cleanup in the river, but we can really be a great assistance to what happens on a long-term basis on the private landowners, how we can work with everybody, get the enthusiasm there on a long-term basis to protect what is done out there. And I think, so our group, that's kind of some of the goals that we have as a group. And we still have a long ways to go, but we're in process. So how do I move this? A rancher don't even know how to move things here. Okay, well, this is just a list of some of the people that we work with. We call them partners. They come to meetings as we're needed. They don't come to every meeting, but when we have certain things that we talk about, we invite them there to take part, and we hopefully learn from them, and they sit and listen to us all too. So that's a pretty valuable tool that we have with all of those people involved, and I think a pretty good starting point for us. So we had a point there in the valley that we had been doing some work on, and so we as a group decided that as landowners it's kind of tough to go out and because there's not a lot of funds there, that we would help some of these landowners to do some projects, and we would go different places and try and find some funding. And this is just an example of some of the projects that we've done in our time on the East Valley, just out of Deer Lodge. There's a long ridge that comes down through there, and we developed a big spring up there and run through there, and you can see where we put 147,000 feet of pipeline down through that ridge. We put 49 tanks. We put some stock water pumps, wells, a windmill, a solar pump. All these things had to do with water and getting the cattle off of the riparian areas. And these are projects that are darn good projects, but they're expensive, and landowners don't seem to have the money to do that. So we have tried to find them sources of funding to do that. And so we found that as a role for us is to step out and to help them do this. And what it does, as I see it anyhow, that it makes for a lot better working relationship for the landowners with what's happening on the river. I can remember when we first started that EPA, Scott came out, some of them, and we sat down and they said, hey, we're not very well received when we go out there and knock on their door. And so could you help us with that? And I think through the years we have helped with that, and I hope we can continue to, so that now, you know, the different agencies that go out, the landowners know what's happening, and hopefully they're better received when they do go there. And so we've had many, many meetings to work with the landowners to explain to them and get their input on what their feelings are and try to get their feelings back. So it's kind of a complicated process for us, but I think find the encouraging part to me is chairman of this thing is to see that the interest is there from the landowners. They're not, you know, we have all kinds. That's why we're all independent, and that's a good part of being a rancher. But to get a bunch of 100 ranchers together, you got 100 different ideas, and try and pull that together. But we're making some strides, and I think there's something to be pretty proud of for that. And the reward for that, hopefully, is going to be the resource that we're all concerned with is going to be a better resource, and it's going to be protected on a long period of time. So we're all hopefully striving in the long run for that goal. So so this is a few of the streams that we're drainages that we're working on right now. We're going to work on a lot more, but this is just an example of some of the ones that we're working on. Some of the funding sources that we do to help with the projects is through NRCS EQIP. We've gotten NRD grants. ARCO has furnished some fundings, Future Fisheries, National Wildlife, DEQ 319 funds, the TMDL process. And then in 2007, we became a 501c3 and trying to get some private funding in there to help also. Norcroft, Whedon, and we're always looking for more and more funding. In this January, we received a $200,000 grant from NRCS that came as part of the Farm Bill. And so we're using that to hold our group together. We have Renee Myers as our executive secretary. Will McDowell now is working 2 days a week. We're looking for 2 summer students to work this summer to do some monitoring and set up some monitoring things out there on the river. So we have quite a lot quite a lot of things happening, and we've got a lot of things yet that we need to do. But and another thing I wanted to touch on a little bit is the forest stewardship program that we started. And this came from a town meeting that we had in Deer Lodge in conjunction with some other groups. And we met 3 or 4 times with a facilitator, and we had put boards on the wall, and everybody said, well, what needs to be done? One of the things that was on the board was the east side. The trees are dying, and we need to do something about that. So I was standing by a local fellow from the mill, and said, well, what are we going to do about it? And I said, well, let's have a meeting. Well, these great meetings, I've spent my whole life at meetings, but anyhow, what came from those meetings is that we decided to check with the Forest Service, and we ended up with a forest stewardship program out there. We've had some highs and lows in that. It's been a kind of a tough deal because of the economy, and the trees are dying, and we're not going to have the funds to work with we planned on, because all of the funds from the sale of the product was supposed to go to, to fix the roads, to help with pollution that's, and in that area and so on. But we're not going to stop. We're still proceeding with that. By this summer, we're going to be able to do some work up there, and but we've put a lot of hard work. And just for an example of some of the working together was I was in awe one day. We were called this meeting, and I walked in, and got to call it was kind of a pleasure to call the meeting to order, and I looked around the room, and they sent the tablet around, and there was 11 different environmental groups. And I thought, wow, 2 or 3 years ago that wouldn't have been. But we all sat around and we discussed what needed to be done. And before we got done, we all signed an MOU. We all had the same goal, and that's why the forest stewardship thing was formed. It's because we all worked together. And so I think that's an example of what we, as this little WRC group, is not in competition with anybody. Like I said, we want to try and work with everybody and help as we can. And hopefully there's I guess I say that, shame on us if it's kind of exciting time right now in the Clark Fork Basin, I think, with the Superfund site and everything we got going. And I say shame on us if we don't come out with a pretty darn neat product when we're done, and shame on us if we don't protect it after it's done. And that's kind of where our group is dedicated to, and that's just kind of the directions that we've decided to take. Am I about out of time? Probably, huh? Okay. So with that, I'll just say that, thanks for inviting us to give our little bit as the landowners, and we just hope that in this process that we can be of some help and continue to make this whole process the best we can. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We've probably got about 2 minutes. Maybe we could answer just a couple questions, if we have any. Or maybe we just covered it so completely that you understand everything. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone.